It began with a scent, a rumor carried on the air, so potent, so utterly vile, that it could turn the stomachs of men hardened by the battlefield and the abattoir. In the hallowed halls of Whitehall Palace, seasoned courtiers, masters of intrigue and etiquette, would press perfumed pomanders to their noses, their faces pale masks of disgust. For the stench of decay did not emanate from the kitchens or the sewers, it emanated from the throne itself. It was the smell of a king rotting alive. And in the cold February of 1547, this putrescence reached its ghastly crescendo. As the funeral procession of King Henry VIII rested for the night, the lid of his magnificent coffin, unable to contain the violent corruption within, burst asunder. In the morning, to the horror of all present, dogs were found licking at the foul fluids that had seeped onto the consecrated floor of an abbey. How did it come to this? How did the golden prince of the Renaissance, the handsomest man in Christendom, a poet, a musician, a theologian of formidable intellect, transform into a 400-pound monster whose own body declared war upon itself? The answer is not a simple tale of gluttony and tyranny. It is a medical detective story, a psychological horror buried for centuries in suppressed physicians' notes and the silent testimony of his own bones. What you are about to hear is not the history you were taught. It is the story of a man's slow, agonizing descent into hell, a journey that began on a single, fateful afternoon with the thunder of hooves and the splintering of a lance. To understand the monster, you must first behold the man. Picture the young Henry, not the bloated, glaring figure from the Holbein portraits, but a titan of charisma and potential. 6'2", with a powerful athletic build, a crown of auburn gold hair, and eyes the color of a summer sky. This was a king who could dance all night, compose a mass in the morning, debate scripture with cardinals in the afternoon, and unhorse the finest knights of France by evening. He was fluent in 4 languages, a scholar who devoured books, a patron of the arts who brought the light of the Renaissance to the stony shores of England. He was a man possessed of a ferocious, almost divine self-belief. He was not merely a king, he was England's destiny made manifest. For 20 years he reigned with a blend of charm and ruthlessness, his passions, though great, largely held in check by a formidable intellect and a shrewd understanding of power. But the foundations of this magnificent edifice were about to be shattered, not by treason or invasion, but by a catastrophic error in the heat of sport. January 24, 1536, the grounds of Greenwich Palace, a cold, bright winter's day. The air is thick with the steam of horses and the scent of mulled wine. The court is a kaleidoscope of color and wealth gathered to watch the king perform in the tilt-yard. At 44, Henry is no longer the slender youth of his accession, but he is still a formidable presence, encased in gleaming, custom-made armor, so exquisite it is a work of art in itself. He mounts his destrier, a war-horse of immense size and power, itself clad in steel plate. The crowd roars its approval. This is their king, their champion, a living symbol of England's strength. He settles his lance, lowers his visor. Across the tilt-yard, his opponent does the same. The trumpet sounds. The ground trembles as 2 armored behemoths, man and beast fused into a single weapon, charge toward each other at a terrifying speed. It is a spectacle of controlled violence, a dance of death played for honor. But this time, the dance goes horribly wrong. We do not know the exact mechanics of the disaster. A miscalculation? A horse that shied at the last second? The result, however, was unequivocal. Instead of the clean splintering of lance on shield, there was a collision of sickening force, like a modern car crash rendered in flesh and steel. Henry, a man weighing well over 250 pounds, plus another 100 pounds of armor, was thrown from the saddle. He crashed to the frozen, unforgiving earth with a sound that silenced the entire crowd. And then, the true horror. His massive warhorse, itself a ton of muscle and bone, stumbled, its own armored weight making recovery impossible. It fell, crashing down directly on top of the king's legs and upper body. Silence. A profound, terrifying silence descended upon the tilt-yard. The cheering died in 1,000 throats. Courtiers froze, their faces etched with a primal fear. Was he dead? Had the heart of England just been extinguished in a mock battle? For 2 hours the king lay unconscious. 2 hours in which England had no active monarch. 2 hours in which the fate of a dynasty hung by a thread. Those were not empty hours. They were a lifetime of political calculation compressed into a single agonizing afternoon. In the sudden vacuum of power, whispers replaced the cheers. Factions, long suppressed by Henry's absolute authority, began to stir. The old guard, loyal to the memory of Queen Catherine and the Catholic faith, saw a glimmer of hope. Their champion, Princess Mary, could be restored to the succession. The imperial ambassador, Eustace Chaput, a spider at the center of this web, likely began drafting a coded dispatch to his master, the Holy Roman Emperor. The Boleyns and their allies, the architects of the new English Protestant, felt the ground turn to quicksand beneath their feet. Their power, their wealth, their very lives were predicated on one man's heartbeat. Without it, they were heretics and traitors. The entire English Reformation, a revolution built on the will of a single man, teetered on the brink of annihilation. In her chambers, a heavily pregnant Anne Boleyn waited, each passing minute an eternity of dread. She clutched her belly, the vessel of all her hopes. A son. It had to be a son. This child would secure her precarious position, silence her enemies, and finally give Henry the heir he so desperately craved. But as the news of the king's fall reached her, a cold terror gripped her heart. Without Henry, she was nothing. The stress of that vigil was immense. Days later, she would miscarry. The child was a boy. It was a loss that would seal her fate. Let us enter those chambers a few weeks later. The air is heavy with the scent of bitter herbs and despair. Anne is pale, a shadow of the vibrant, defiant woman who had captivated a king. Her brother George Boleyn stands by the window, his face grim. "He sent for me today," George says, his voice low. "He did not ask after you. He spoke only of the treasury, of a new design for a fortress on the coast. His eyes, Anne, his eyes were like chips of ice." Anne pulls a shawl tighter around her shoulders, though the room is warm. "He looks at me, George, but he does not see me, not his Anne. He sees a failure, a barren field. Since the fall, the man I knew is gone. The laughter is gone. The poetry is gone. All that is left is this cold, suspicious rage." "The miscarriage has unhinged him," George whispers, glancing at the door. He sees it not as a tragedy, but as a judgment, God's judgment upon your union. The whispers of our enemies are now a chorus in his ears. "I gave him a daughter," Anne says, her voice trembling with a fury born of fear. "I would have given him a son. This was a son. But he has become a stranger, a monster who sleeps beside me. Last night he woke screaming, not from pain in his leg, but about traitors in his household. He looked at me then, and I saw my own death in his eyes." "We built our house on the king's love, sister," George says, his own fear finally showing. "Now that love has curdled into madness. The walls are beginning to crack. We must be careful. Every word, every glance is being weighed." When Henry finally stirred from his unconsciousness, when his eyes fluttered open, the court breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the man who awoke was not the man who had fallen. The charming Renaissance prince had been left on the tilt-yard. In his place, a tyrant was born. and Anne Boleyn, as she had foreseen, was dead on the executions block within 4 months, her brother George beside her. But the injury to his mind was only one half of the curse unleashed that day. The other was far more tangible, a wound that would become the festering, stinking core of his private hell. The fall had violently reopened an old jousting injury on his leg, and in a world without antibiotics, a deep, persistent open wound was a slow-motion death sentence. This is where the tragedy of Henry VIII descends into the realm of pure body horror. Imagine for a moment living with chronic, suppurating ulcers on both of your legs, sores the size of tennis balls that never heal, every single day for the rest of your life.
The pain would have been a constant companion, a burning, gnawing agony that even the softest silk sheets would inflame into a scream. We have a secret window into this suffering. The hidden notes of his court physician, Dr. Thomas Vicary, describe ulcers of a grievous nature, stinking and painful beyond measure. Twice a day, the royal bedchamber became a scene of medical torture. The king's leg would be lanced and drained, filling bronze bowls with infected fluid that servants would hurry away, their faces averted. Let us follow 2 of those physicians as they leave the royal presence, retreating to a small antechamber. The senior physician, Dr. Vicary, slumps onto a stool, his face etched with exhaustion. His young assistant, hands still trembling, leans against the cold stone wall. "I have seen plague pits and battlefield wounds, Master Vicary," the assistant says, his voice barely a whisper. "But I have never seen such corruption on a living man. The smell. It is as if the grave is claiming him piece by piece while he still breathes." Dr. Vicary rubs his eyes, the stench still clinging to his robes, his nostrils. The grave is patient. "We are not physicians here, boy. We are groundskeepers, tending to a patch of rot. We apply our poultices, our salves. It is like trying to dam a river with a handful of mud. The poison is in the bone. It is in his blood." "He watches us," the assistant adds, shivering. "Today, when you applied the dressing, his eyes never left your hands. He believes we mean to poison him, doesn't he?" Vicary nods grimly. He suspects everyone. He thinks the poison could be in the linen, on the tip of the probe. One wrong move, one wince of pain from him that he deems excessive, and it is the tower for us both. We are tasked with preserving a life that is already forfeit, for a man who would kill us for our failure. We are dressing death itself and praying it does not look up and notice us. Henry, a man consumed by pride and a terrifying vanity, fought a desperate losing battle to conceal this decay. He designed contraptions, leather gutters with lead weights to compress the wounds. He drenched himself in the most expensive perfumes, and he commanded his court painter, Hans Holbein, to depict him in that famous power stance, legs wide, impossibly strong and athletic. It was the greatest lie of his reign. The infection was not localized. It was a poison seeping into his entire system. Modern analysis points to chronic osteomyelitis, a terrifying infection of the bone itself, releasing a toxic slurry into his bloodstream. This systemic tide washed over every organ in his body. It traveled to his liver, his heart, and most critically, back to his already damaged brain. This systemic poisoning created a living hell. The constant grinding pain, the fevers, and most devastatingly, the neurological effects. The toxins exacerbated the damage from the TBI, fueling his violent mood swings and creating a suffocating paranoia. He saw enemies everywhere. The world became a reflection of the war raging within his own veins. By 1542, the ulcers entered a new horrific phase, the discharge turning green, then black. His body, unable to bear exercise, ballooned. His waist measurement, preserved in his suits of armor, tells the story. In 1540, a formidable 48 inches. By 1545, an almost unbelievable 54 inches. The palace itself had to be remade to accommodate the grotesque bulk of its master. Doorways were widened, floors were reinforced. His life became an elaborate, shameful performance, and his mind continued its descent. He held rambling conversations with his long-dead father. He would call out for his mother. The French ambassador described a dinner party where the king suddenly fell silent, stared at an empty chair, whispering, "No, not now, leave me," before erupting in a terrifying rage. The court learned to live in a state of constant, nerve-shredding fear, using a secret system of colored ribbons to signal the king's mood. There's a secret hidden in his most famous portrait. X-rays have revealed that Holbein originally painted the king holding not a simple glove, but a wooden staff topped with a human skull, a macabre memento mori. After his death, this detail was painted over. His heirs could not bear for him to be remembered as the death-obsessed madman that he had become. Christmas, 1546, the final act. Henry is now a figure barely recognizable as human. Propped on his throne, his face swollen and discolored, his jaundiced eyes sunk deep in pouches of flesh. He cannot stand unaided. The smell that clings to him is now so powerful that incense burns constantly, a futile gesture against the tide of his own decomposition. January 1547. The end is near. The ulcers have eaten through flesh and sinew, exposing the bone beneath. Gangrene has set in. His organs begin to fail. His kidneys shut down. His liver ceases to function. His massive abdomen swells with fluid. His tongue swells, turning his speech into a wet, gargling parody of a human voice. It takes 6 strong men to turn his massive, sore-covered body in the bed. In his final days, his mind becomes a battlefield of delirium and terrifying clarity. In lucid moments, he knows he is dying, and the terror is absolute. He begs his physicians for a cure. Then the delirium returns. He cries out for his brother Arthur, for his stillborn children, and most pathetically for Catherine, his first, most loyal queen, asking her to pray for his soul. On the night of January 27th, Archbishop Cranmer is summoned. The scene that greets him is one of apocalyptic horror. The king is in the throes of violent seizures, his half-ton body convulsing with such force that the reinforced bed frame groans and cracks. 6 men struggle to hold him down. Between convulsions, he vomits black, clotted bile. The stench, Cranmer would later write, was so foul he had to leave the room twice to be sick. As the clock ticked past midnight, Henry's eyes would sometimes focus on horrors only he could see. He screamed about flames, about demons crawling up from the floor, begging someone to put out the fire that was consuming him. Near 2 a.m, his breathing changed to the death rattle. Cranmer, holding the massive swollen hand, leaned close and asked him to give a sign if he trusted in Christ for his salvation. With a final, monumental effort, the king's fingers tightened once, a weak, fleeting pressure. Then the grip went slack. At 2:07 a.m. on January 28, 1547, the great and terrible reign of Henry VIII was over. But the horror was not. The infection that had consumed him in life now accelerated its work in death. His body began to decompose with shocking speed. The Privy Council kept his death a secret for 3 days while they figured out what to do with the king's treacherous remains. Embalmers were summoned. When they opened the body cavity, they were met with a scene of utter ruin. They worked frantically, packing the cavity with over 100 pounds of salt and spices and sealing it all within a massive, specially reinforced lead coffin. It was not enough. During the journey to his final resting place, the pressure of the putrefying gases continued to build. At Sion Abbey, the inevitable happened. With the sound like a clap of thunder, the lead seams of the coffin burst. Putrid, liquefied remains began to leak out onto the chapel floor. And in the final grotesque indignity, stray dogs crept into the chapel during the night and were found lapping at the spilled effluence of the king. The man who had declared himself head of the church, who saw himself as God's chosen instrument on earth, ended his journey as carrion for scavenging animals. The scene was so scandalous that all witnesses were sworn to absolute secrecy on pain of death. The official record was a lie. The truth was buried, hidden for history for centuries. The story of Henry VIII's decline is more than just a tale of a monstrous king. It is a terrifying reminder of the fragility of the human body and the human mind. It shows how a single moment of chance can unravel a life, a dynasty, and a nation. It forces us to ask a disturbing question: was the tyrant who terrorized England for his final decade truly Henry? Or was he merely a prisoner inside a collapsing, poisoned vessel, his personality erased by trauma, his cruelty fueled by unimaginable, relentless pain? The Golden Prince was dead long before his heart stopped beating. The monster who replaced him was not born of evil, but of an agony that rotted him from the inside out. The archives are full of such stories, where the official narrative is but a gilded screen hiding a far darker and more complex truth. If you are compelled to look behind that screen, to understand the hidden forces that truly shape history, then subscribe and join us in the shadows. Our next investigation uncovers the political conspiracy behind the execution of Anne Boleyn, revealing a connection to French espionage that changes everything you thought you knew. Click here and let us continue our descent into the darkness.